I think I'll start out and just talk a little bit about what exactly autism is. Autism is a very big continuum that goes from very severe, the child remains nonverbal, all the way up to brilliant scientists and engineers. And I actually feel at home here because there's a lot of autism genetics here. You wouldn't have any, it's a continuum of traits.
Dr. Temple Grandin, different, not less. Breaking barriers to understanding autism. Dr. Temple Grandin defies any barriers which keep her from her passions. Her successful career and research in animal husbandry has challenged producers and the livestock industry to consider ethical behaviors in the care, breeding, and farming practices they use. Dr. Temple Grandin, through her positive persona, encourages people to reach their full potential and overcome autism's challenges, using her own journey with autism as a guide. She speaks at autism conferences, teaches how she broke the barriers she faced as a young person with autism, and supports a greater acceptance of people with autism in society. Temple Grandin, born in August of 1947 in Boston, Massachusetts, refused to speak as a child, even as other children her age learned to talk. While other children loved affection, Grandin pulled away from her mother. Temple was diagnosed with infant schizophrenia, as well as brain damage. The doctor insisted Grandin be institutionalized, as was the practice of the time for children with developmental disabilities. Even her father wanted her to be sent away. Her mother, however, fought to keep Temple at home, while searching medical journals for an answer to the impediments Temple faced. In 1943, only 4 years before Temple was born, Dr. Leo Kanner had coined the term autism to describe children with little to no speech. With this knowledge, Mrs. Grandin knew she was on the verge of breaking through the obstacles holding her daughter, Temple, back. After extensive speech therapy and encouragement from her family, Temple finally spoke her first words at the age of 4.
I was in a really good early intervention by 2.5 years old, and it was just two older teachers working in a house. They were these experienced teachers that just knew how to work with kids. And there was a lot of emphasis on teaching turns, turn taking, really, really important to work on that. And then I had a terrible time in high school.
The next hurdle was school. Because of her autism, the bells between classes hurt her ears. Other students did not understand her differences, and Temple would often throw tantrums. Fortunately, the teacher and her mother taught Temple social skills when she was young through work and games.
And in the 50s, manners were taught, social rules were taught. That definitely helped. So I got really good early intervention.
At 14, Mrs. Grandin took Temple to Hampshire Country School, a boarding school for a small group of children with behavioral problems. Here, Temple was encouraged to participate in activities like horseback riding and caring for the school's horses. These interventions when she was a teenager were successful. Unfortunately, puberty struck, and Temple Grandin began experiencing panic attacks. In addition, her parents divorced when Grandin was 15. These changes in her life actually revealed a silver lining to Grandin's future. Her mother was remarried to Ben Cutler, and Temple Grandin visited her new step-aunt's farm during the summer of her 16th birthday. While staying on the ranch, she built machines using her visual learning skills and spent much time with the animals on the farm. The ranch brought Temple Grandin face to face with cattle. She cared for and touched the cattle, and she observed the cattle and their behaviors, often by standing in the middle of the herd. She was fascinated by a device called a cattle chute or squeeze chute used to calm cattle. Cows were put into the chute, and their necks and bodies were gently squeezed between panels. Workers would use the device when the cattle needed vaccines or any kinds of hands-on treatment. They were calm and restrained. Grandin found herself wondering if the squeeze chute would have the same calming effect on her. She did not like the feeling of a hug, which has a calming effect on most people, but when her aunt allowed her to use the machine on herself, Temple felt immediately relaxed. Grandin discovered for herself that most people did not think the same way she did. For example, when she's given a word such as dog, instead of picturing a generic dog, she sees in her mind every dog she has ever seen. She compares her way of thinking to a Google for pictures. Her visual method of thinking allows her to create intricate machines and systems in her head, and she is able to walk through the design step by step without building the machine first to see any flaws in her system. Some of her first designs were created at the ranch, like a machine which opened and closed gates without the person having to step out of their car. She built a squeeze machine that she was able to control from the inside, to relax her when she experienced panic attacks. The squeeze machine was the key to Temple Grandin's graduation from Hampshire Country School, second in her class. When she moved to Franklin Pierce University in the 1960s, she brought her squeeze machine with her to keep her calm. Unfortunately, officials at the school tried to keep her from having it, but her high school teacher advised advised her to do a study on the machine to prove that it helped with her education. She graduated from Franklin Pierce University in 1970 with a bachelor's in human psychology. Her research for the squeeze machine later led to the creation of many devices and furniture pieces that help children with autism remain calm. After graduation from Franklin Pierce, Temple decided Arizona State University would meet her goal of studying animal behavior, specifically the behavior of cattle in different kinds of cattle chutes. At the time, it was rare for a person to study animal behavior, and no one had ever studied something as specific as cattle chutes. Temple Grandin was the only woman in her class and on the feedlots at Arizona State. In addition to her studies, Grandin was a consultant on cattle chutes. Men on the feedlots were hostile towards her.
Well, the biggest problem I had in the 70s, back when I was in my 20s, is being a woman in the cattle industry, which is a man's industry. That was a much bigger barrier than autism ever was. It was being a woman. I mean, there were certain meetings I was not allowed to go to. I got kicked out of a feed yard because I was a woman.
When she began designing cattle chutes and processing systems, the cowboys would sabotage her designs. But every day she returned, and eventually she was left alone. She broke barriers in the cattle industry with her perseverance, proving to these men that a woman was able to achieve. In the early 1970s, cattle in Arizona were plagued with scabies, a contagious disease spread by mites. At the time, the only solution was to use a dip vat, a pool around 7 feet deep filled with pesticides. The cattle had to be completely submerged after walking down a steel ramp. Cattle do not like these conditions, and Temple had the data to prove it. No one seemed to understand why the cattle were afraid, and the flawed system continued to be used, with the cattle getting out of control and some even drowning. The manager of Red River Feed Yard, a feedlot owned by actor John Wayne, had read some of Temple Grandin's work and contacted her about their dip vat. He gave her 2 weeks to design a new system, a challenge Grandin could and did accept. Her revolutionary design limited the cattle from panicking, a gentler ramp leading to a drop-off where cows could swim to the surface. Grandin's personal instincts created a safer and more effective dip method for cattle. Grandin credits her abilities to see through the eyes of the animal to her autism. Her autism is not a barrier. It makes her like a prey animal. What makes an animal scared also scares Grandin. When Temple Grandin began to design economical animal processing facilities, plants where animals are butchered for food, humane treatment of the animals was foremost in Grandin's mind. Today, over 50% of the beef in the United States and Canada has been processed in a facility Dr. Temple Grandin designed. Emergence, labeled autistic, was Dr. Grandin's first book on the subject of autism, published in 1986. Written with Margaret M. Scariano, the book was hailed as the first book written from the perspective of a person with autism. The only autism information at the time were studies of autistic children, written by scientists with no inside perspective of the condition. Dr. Grandin was able to write of her experiences with autism, as well as how she was able to break the barriers within her own mind to become the successful person she is today. Dr. Grandin originally referred to herself as a recovered autistic individual, but she later abandoned this label, realizing she did not recover from autism. Instead, she broke the barriers the condition created for her. Dr. Temple Grandin quickly became prominent in the autism community when the anthology An Anthropologist on Mars featured her story while describing different neurological conditions. Dr. Grandin has written over a dozen books on the subject of autism, many of them written to advise parents of techniques on how to successfully raise a child with autism so they thrive in society. She advises these parents and children to get outside, interact with nature, limit screen time, and encourage social interaction. She challenges those with autism to break through the barriers of their condition in order to grow into independent and successful adults. She speaks from the mind of a person who overcame the confines of her own autism, speaking for those without a voice, and freely shares her journey with the world. Dr. Grandin empowers her audiences at autism conferences across the country. Her speeches and presence allow children and adults with autism to personally see achievement. These audiences witness an individual who has used her autism to succeed in education, to see what others are unable to see, and to share that knowledge. Dr. Temple Grandin has broken the impediments of a condition which can isolate people. She has become a productive member of society. I don't want my thoughts to die with me. I want to have done something. I'm not interested in power or piles of money. I want to leave something behind. I want to make a positive contribution. Know that my life has meaning. Dr. Temple Grandin has broken through the barriers of autism and has proven that different is not less.